you still hear me okay?
Go for it, Stephanie.
Okay, great. We are pleased to welcome you to today's interactive discussion on engaging the entire audience, working with workshop participants to maximize success. We thank you all for joining and for your patience with the technical difficulties. This is Stephanie Smith speaking, and I'm the project coordinator here at the Academy. We have just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Throughout the discussion, we encourage you to keep your speaker muted while not talking, though we do encourage you to unmute so that you can ask questions and have conversation with the group. This discussion is being recorded and will be housed on our Train the Trainer facilitators and administrators community on ACH Connect for future reference. I would also like to take this time to share a few details with you about the upcoming ACH Facilitator Summit. The event will take place in Dallas, Texas, January 13th through the 14th, and registration is now open. The summit provides a unique opportunity to foster connections across facilitators and leaders from other Train the Trainer programs representing 25+ healthcare institutions. If you are thinking about attending the Facilitator Summit, we'd like to extend the invitation to you to attend an interactive discussion on October 16th, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This will be an opportunity for you to hear from ACH faculty members and past attendees about their experiences. We'll also be sending a registration information for this conversational webinar after today's session. Moving forward, I'm very pleased to begin my handover here to welcome Calvin Chou. Dr. Chou is Professor of Clinical Medicine at the University of San Francisco and staff physician at the Veterans Healthcare System in San Francisco. He is recognized throughout the United States for his efforts in education and research to enhance communication between patients and physicians. He has delivered communication skills curricular for providers at health systems across the country. He is the editor of the books Remediation in Medical Education, a Mid-Course Correction, and Communication RX, Transforming Healthcare Through Relationship-Centered Communication. I will now pass the presentation to you, Calvin. Welcome.
Stephanie, I think you fell off my audio, but I think you just handed it over to me. So can I start?
I did, absolutely. Sorry about that.
Really pleased to be here today with everyone to talk about how we can enhance our facilitation in the courses that we run. If you have not yet added your name to your name is, that would be helpful to me so I know who is there. I think in terms of the hygiene of the webinar, I will pause at specific points for questions rather than going through the whole thing and then ending with it or asking for questions in the middle. I think just having those intermediate points where questions can be asked would be helpful. And if you would like to type in your question while I'm speaking, that's great. And then I'll also pause, and then maybe you can unmute and we can have some discussion as well. Let me see if I can make this work. There we go. No. Let me try this again. Maybe Rachel, can you help me here? Let me see if I can do this. You're doing it? Okay, great. And then if I do this. There, okay. I don't know if you just did that, Rachel, if I did, but hopefully we'll get this going. So, thank you for your patience. It is very, very important that we as facilitators be able to bring our best selves to the work that we do, because this work is so important to the interactions that we have between us and our colleagues and indeed set the stage and set the tone for the entire organization's culture. And if we can enhance everyone in our individual institutions to have more of a relationship-centered approach to communication and to dealing with each other, that is what I'm thinking is our ultimate goal, is to deepen the relationships between ourselves. So I am going to present you first an approach to how I facilitate. And obviously this is one approach. There are many, many different approaches out there. But when I think about starting a course or teaching in a course, I first think of the institution that I'm in, that I'm presenting this material in. For many of you on this webinar, you're presenting in your own institution. And so you have some ideas of what is in the institution, what the institutional culture is. For some folks like me who come from outside of an institution there are lots of questions that come up in my mind about what the institution's culture is, what I'm gleaning, and then there is the group that we are facilitating. The group is, by definition, a microcosm of the institution. It's a biopsy, if you will, of the institution. It may not be fully representative of what's going on in an institution, and yet at the same time, it is representative of the institution as a whole. So that subcircle, the group that we are facilitating in the one-day class or one-day course that we're teaching, a subset of that institution. Then there are the individual one-on-one interactions that we have with every individual in a group that overall comprise the group. So there are times when I am, for example, right now, I'm speaking to the entire group. And there are times when I'm speaking to individuals within the group. For example, when you're setting up a role play, and running the role play and debriefing the role play, you're addressing individuals at a time. And then finally, there's you or me. There's you. And you are part of this for that particular day, or maybe you are part of the institution. You are, for that particular day, part of this entire system, if you will, okay? And sometimes we think of ourselves as delivering material or not being a full partner sometimes in the interactions, and actually we are a very, very important part of the interactions that are happening one-on-one in the group, in institution, because in the same way that you can imagine a drop going to a pool of water and then the ripples going out, that any intervention that we may make may have that ongoing ripple effect. And so therefore, rather than thinking of myself as a circle or as a red circle or a dot or an acne lesion, I'd rather think of myself with some heart, that I have to know that I'm bringing my best self. And if I'm bringing my best self, I also have to make certain that I'm okay with my best self, because if I can bring love to the one-on-one interactions that then form a ripple effect toward the group, that then form a ripple effect toward the institution, that is what I'm ultimately hoping for. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about how we can, on all of these different levels, interact in order to improve enhance our already excellent facilitation skills. So I'm going to start with me. or you, the individual. We're going to start with the individual. It is all about you. First of all, thinking as you are starting your facilitation, thinking about what's going on with you. There are days when I'm facilitating where I am feeling great. And there are days when I'm facilitating where I'm kind of tired, or I've flown across country and I'm 3 hours ahead of where I usually am, and I'm not feeling that great. So just taking a very, very brief inventory of how am I doing? How am I doing physically? Am I tired? Do I need a little coffee? Not too much coffee because I don't want to get all frenetic. Can I minimize external distractions? This is one of those things where family issues may impinge. I may have a whole bunch of emails that I need to write, or patient care issues that I need to deal with, and trying to wall myself away from those as much as possible so I can be fully present in the session as much as possible. Level of preparation. This is one thing that we ourselves have full control over. When I first started teaching these courses, it was a source of great consternation to me that never felt like I was fully on top of the material, and only after I practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced myself and got on top of the slide deck did I finally feel like, okay, I can move forward from here. What essentially this is doing right here is decreasing your cognitive load. If you can automate your preparation, if you know exactly what slide is coming next, you don't have to think a lot about what slide is coming next, and that gives you more mental reserve to be able to figure out what's going on in the group. And therefore, the emotional self-check-in is probably, for me, the most important thing. How am I feeling right now? What are my emotions right now? Am I sad? Am I happy? Am I nervous? Am I excited? Or maybe am I a little bit of both? Am I nerve-sighted? This is a term that was coined by one of my students, and maybe it's not coined. Maybe it's a hashtag out there or something like that. But remembering that a feeling of nervousness or anxiety has a very, very similar, if not the exact same pathway, nervous system pathway in our bodies as excitement. So being able to reframe nervousness as excitement in terms of what I'm going to do also decreases my cognitive load, enabling me to perform better. And one of the things that you may have heard of in the past is if you do your super person pose, that might give you more confidence. And you may also have heard now that the data behind the super person pose has now been somewhat debunked. And even if those data have been debunked, there's still something in there about approaching a group with confidence, with excitement, rather than nervousness, because your group can smell that nervousness on you. So in as much as you can bring your best self, B, your most excited and enthusiastic self, even if you have to use this iron-on patch in order to get there, it's much better to go in with a feeling of confidence than with a feeling of dejection. So this all about me piece is, I think, probably in my mind, the most important preparation that I can do before I go in to facilitate. So in the same way that super person pose has, it helps and it also has been debunked, there are these tensions that we always have to navigate within ourselves. That sometimes if we don't have enough confidence, then people can smell that. But if we have too much confidence, that's also not good either, because who likes to learn about communication skills from somebody with a lot of hubris? So really bringing your authentic self, not too much, not too little. The second point here, lean into your feelings. So am I feeling a little bit sad right now? Yeah, okay, I want to make certain that I recognize that sadness and let it go. Because if I bring that sadness into the group, then the group becomes sad, or they smell it on me. So really, as much as I can let go of some of the feelings, just naming them sometimes is good enough. And the third piece here, holding yourself to high standards. That's very, very important. And at the same time, giving yourself some slack, because that high performance, that perfect performance, actually, I don't think I have ever given a perfect performance in the hundreds, literally hundreds of courses that I've run. And initially, I would just, when I would make a mistake, or when there was a question I couldn't answer, then I would jump on myself all over it, and that would make me a worse facilitator in the moment. So just give yourself some slack. And also, you don't want to just let it all go. You want to be the best facilitator you can be. So this really brings home the point of, it's all about the three bears. It's all about the baby bear. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's being just right. And the tension that Mama Bear and Papa Bear pull you in different directions, trying to find where your right space is in any given day is critical. And also being able to flex, because where you might have been perfect one day is not going to be exactly right for another group. So it's all about flexibility and adaptation. So it's all about me, right? Actually, it's not all about me, because if you remember, what we're teaching is relationship-centered communication. And if we focus on the me, then we're not doing our entire system justice. We're teaching relationship-centered communication in a relationship-centered way. So we are using those same skills to develop the learning in our learners. And remembering also that this is not a unidirectional, the relationships are rarely unidirectional, that they're bidirectional. So rather than imparting teaching in one direction, we're really wanting more interaction between, as much interaction as possible between the group and ourselves. And that requires that we are as stable or as centered as we can be, so that when we have interactions with others, we can maintain that core. So before I move on to when it's not about us, but when it's about our learners, maybe now is a reasonable time to pause and think, reflect first on this first piece of self-awareness and writing oneself in your own space before you start interacting with others. And I'm wondering right now if there are any questions that have come up from the group. And if you could say who you are and where you're from, in case other folks don't know you, that might be helpful as well. So everyone has solved the internal issue, which is great. You're much further along than I was. So I also will reserve some space at the very end of the talk so that we can think more about this, each of these pieces as we go on. All right. So we're moving from the love of myself to these one-on-one interactions, not of the group just yet, just one-on-one interactions. And just to begin, just thinking about this statement. The workshop starts at the beginning. So think to yourself, how do you define beginning? If you think about the beginning as when you first, when you first start the PowerPoint presentation, that is partly right. If you think about the beginning being the first time you interact with one of the people in the room, that is partly right. If you think about the workshop beginning when you arrive in the room, whether or not there are people in the room, that is also partly right. And if I take that concept of preparation from before, if the beginning is when you're starting to prepare with your co-facilitator, that is also partly right. And also, if you think about the workshop starting at the beginning, when you first start thinking about scheduling for the day and going through the slide deck and making and seeing how prepared you are for the day, that is also partly right. So all of those things, the workshop begins at all of those places. It doesn't begin just with preparation, because each individual item that I named is a separate beginning and it involves more skills, in fact. So if you think about the workshop, one part of the beginning of the workshop as knowing who is going to be there, looking at a list of people if there is such a list, that can also start preparing you for the potential interactions that you're going to have without jumping to conclusions. So oftentimes we'll look at a list. Some institutions I know have a spreadsheet where they list name, department, degrees, number of years they've been at the institution, and maybe other items. Those kinds of data can be really helpful to prepare you for potential interactions that you're going to have. The mix of men and women, if you happen to know. Whether or not there are people who are going to be, whether they're people of leadership who are going to be present. Whether or not there's going to be hierarchy of different kinds, maybe in terms of seniority or in terms of age, or differences in terms of training, APPs, doctors, medical students, graduate residents, lots of different kinds of folks who may be attending your sessions, and being able to think through just a little bit how those elements of diversity may play out. If you happen to know people before you get, if you know somebody before you get there, and what your relationship with those people are, that also can make things potentially better or potentially worse, depending on your prior relationships with them. And this is where having your co-facilitator help you go through that list and prepare can be super helpful. I borrowed this line from Denise Davis. Practice makes not perfect, it makes better. We can, as I mentioned earlier, we can never get perfect, but we can definitely get better. And therefore, going through your slide deck and practicing, using relationship-centered skills in every single encounter that you have, both in your professional life as well as in your personal life. Those just practicing those RCC skills all the time just makes you a better facilitator, because that allows you more. That allows you to bring all of your skill into the room. Arriving early, if not half an hour before, then maybe sometimes even before that, just to make certain that your PowerPoint is working, that if your PowerPoint isn't working, like we're having some trouble at this, as we began this webinar, then all of a sudden, all kinds of cognitive load is being spent on trying to make the technology work, and you're not spending that time with your learners, you're not spending time preparing for the day. So as early as you can arrive, the better, if nothing else, to interface with your co-facilitator. And this is maybe one of the biggest learnings that I've had the more train-the-trainer programs that I have been involved in and seen, is if you can let go of your inner introvert and approach participants as they arrive in the room before the whole thing starts, and engage them in conversation, particularly those people who you think you're going to have trouble with. So, you know, the senior surgeon or the chair of medicine, as they arrive in the room, remembering that that is a person, not a role, and approaching that person as a person and saying, hey, you know, just welcoming them to the room. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Some of those early build rapport quickly skills that we teach about in our courses are invaluable here, particularly for folks that we think we may have trouble with down the line. Because if we can develop that rapport quickly in the very beginning, even before the course starts, that is money in the bank that we can withdraw later if need be. So this is one of those resistance preventing kinds of moves that I have seen work time and time again. And I know for myself, when I walk into a room, I kind of just want to get the PowerPoint and I kind of want to get started. And it took me a long time actually to approach people and overcome this inner hope that, well, maybe people won't notice me until I finally start talking. Just making those connections with individuals is absolutely important. I have summarized a lot of thinking and data in the medical education literature and the educational literature writ large about the learning environment on this slide. And it's necessarily simplistic, and I boiled it down to what I think the four most important concepts are in terms of establishing the learning environment in our one-day classes. The top one is positive human contact. So that is the reason for approaching folks before the class begins in a personal way. Some of the elementary school data suggests that a teacher, if he or she stands outside the room and greets each student as they arrive in the room in a very, very positive way, that positive interaction then leads to better learning throughout the day because they're starting off on the right foot. The second piece here, fostering internal motivation. This is something that we, that you as facilitators are doing all the time, and why we don't impart information like I am right now. And that is really to figure out what is going on for that person, what case is going to work best for that person, and how can I get the learning to happen within them rather than me telling them stuff. The third item here, avoiding judgment and striving for unconditional positive regard. This is one of the tenets on which ACH was originally built, is this concept by Carl Rogers, which is ultimately unachievable, but we can get closer and closer and closer to it the more we work on it, is that we are approaching each one of our learners in the same way that we might approach patients or colleagues, with unconditional positive regard, that we want to look at them, that we do not want to, that we want to accord a very, very positive attitude toward them, and that they are doing things, that all of their actions and behaviors and words come from a good place. And I think in healthcare, that is an excellent assumption. So striving for that idea in your mind for your learners. And then the last one here, being vulnerable and at the same time not being a pushover. Again, one of those tensions, not too much, not too little, just right. Being impervious to correction makes one look unapproachable, and then being too meek as a facilitator also can it can be ineffective. So really establishing that balance between the two. Before I move on to the group, here's another time where it may be helpful to pause and think about both questions about one's own self-awareness as well as individual interactions before we move on to group level questions or challenges. Okay, I'll move on, and if you would like to type something in the meantime, I'll do my best to address all those things. All right, so from the group standpoint, so we are starting the day, and we're doing our first introduction to the group of ourselves. One of the things that I've been compiling over the last 10 or so years that I've been running Train the Trainer programs are some characteristics of the most effective workshop leaders. And I'm not talking about ACH faculty who have done this for a long time. I'm talking about people just like you who have done the first 5 days of Train the Trainer and then have done their pilots. Some of the most effective things that I've ever seen in workshops, I see in those pilots. When you're just starting out facilitating, and some of the I've seen some really exemplary behaviors, and what I've tried to do is to summarize them here. The first one is to open strongly. If you rewind to the way that I started here, it was all about technology. That's not, and apologies that the technology wasn't working that well. That's not really that inspiring. So if I were to do that over again, if you were to take out that technology piece, and then the first thing that I said about how important it is for us as facilitators to create change in our institutions on using relationship-centered communication, that is the kind of strong opening that you can start with. One of the strongest openings I have ever seen was several months ago when I was doing a Train the Trainer program at Stanford, and Amit Singh, who is a pediatrician there, pediatric hospitalist there, had one of the, when he said this opening, I was so inspired, and he allowed me to share this with you. So so feel free to use any part of this as you like. He said, "Communication is the centerpiece of everything we do in patient care. It doesn't matter how smart we are or how technically proficient we may be. If we can't communicate effectively to our patients to help them learn and incorporate that, learn about and improve their health, we're doing them a disservice." Feel free to use that. I found that really inspiring. And that is before you even say your name. The first thing you say is this line, and then you say, "My name is Calvin Chou, and I'm going to be one of your facilitators for today." Right? It's very different from saying, "My name is Calvin, and I'm an internist, and thank you for coming today," and then using something else. Using that inspiring opening makes people sit up and listen. Workshop leaders who know their stuff fluently, I've kind of harped on this a couple of different times in terms of preparation. If you have memorized the foolproof guide to the role play, that is knowing your stuff. That is knowing your stuff fluently. If you know your PowerPoint inside out and know what click goes to what line, that is knowing your stuff fluently. There's no substitute for practicing. Talking to the audience and not to the slides. Obviously, referring to the slides is okay, but if the more you can engage individual audience members, the less resistance you're going to have. Demonstrating levity from the very beginning, and in my various Train the Trainer programs, I've had the real honor of training people from lots and lots of different backgrounds and lots of different levels of experience. And if I were to make one generalization, it would be that many of our pediatrics colleagues who do train the trainer have a very, very sort of humorous or fun-oriented approach to giving talks and to doing work. So the more you can bring in humor and fun-lovingness without saying we're going to have fun today, that sounds a little bit, that can be a little bit, oh, okay, we're going to have fun. The more you can bring fun into what you're saying, the less resistant folks can be. Using RCC skills throughout the day, not just teaching them, but demonstrating them when you're talking with your learners. I think I've gone through that already. And finally, assuming there's going to be resistance. And rather than smacking them down, is to approach it with curiosity. This principle from motivational interviewing called roll with resistance. If somebody comes at you, literally, with resistance, rather than getting into an argument with them, well, actually, you know, the data show blank, or my experience shows blank, and, you know, I've fallen into that trap many, many times, just using RCC skills instead. So it sounds to me that you're having trouble seeing how some of these skills might be able to be incorporated in your own practice. Just reflecting back, and building that relationship, and even giving them the floor, just to say many people have that exact same legitimization. Many people have that exact same issue with some of these skills, and I'm just going to ask you to try it and see if it works. If it doesn't, you know, you're not going to, no sweat off my brow. But I would love if you might try it, right? So it's about working with them as opposed to saying, no, you're going to do this, because when approaching it that way, if you've ever been with a patient where we're saying you got to do this and they don't want to do it, or a child, it's an even better example, a child who doesn't want to do something and you force them to do it is not a pretty sight. Couple of folks, as you registered for this webinar, talked about facilitation challenges, and so I want to recap some of the approaches to facilitation challenges that you may have gone through already in your Train the Trainer program, and it is always useful, I think, to review them. And in addition to that, I have added a couple of bells and whistles to what you may have learned before. The first thing, if you are in the middle of a facilitation challenge, is to name to yourself what is happening. I am noticing, and you're saying this only to yourself, I don't think I would speak this out to the group. I'm noticing that participant is speaking a lot, okay? Second thing, how is it affecting you? If you realize to yourself, kind of going back to the beginning of this talk, you know, that heart that is me, there is some part of me that gets triggered when somebody takes the floor and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. So how is it affecting me? I'm really bothered by this. Then how is it affecting the group? If the rest of the group is rapt attention on that participant, then it is your issue and you got to let it go. Facilitating for you is less important than facilitating for the group. And then if you must intervene, let's say that person is speaking and speaking and you're noticing the group losing attention, or they're starting to look at you like do something non-verbally, then to intervene in stages. First, check in non-verbally with a co-facilitator if your co-facilitator is present. Waiting for the person to self-correct, which by now you probably have done already. And then starting with gentle and subtle interventions and progressing only if needed. So again, I'll use an example of a trainer at Advent Health who was doing a pilot program in Burleson, Texas. And there was his co-facilitator was doing a slide, doing the PowerPoint slide presentation, and there was a side conversation going on. And this facilitator, who was standing near the back of the room, just looked at his co-facilitator who was speaking, and then started drifting, stood up and started drifting closer to the group to the pair that was having a side conversation. And as he got closer, the folks in the side conversation looked up at him, and then they continued a little bit further. He got closer to them. They looked up again. He signaled to his co-facilitator just to stop for a moment, and he said, "Hey, you guys, it sounds like something really important is happening here. Would you like to share it with the group?" It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And then finally, once you have done some kind of intervention like this, is to debrief about it afterwards. So so this particular instance, I was there as an observer, and so we made certain that both co-facilitators and I sat down at the break and said, like, tell me what happened, what you did, what you think the effect on the group was, and how you think that may play out for the rest of the day. So, approach to facilitation challenges. Sometimes you don't know exactly what to do in the moment, and so sometimes you just have to improvise and make it up. All right, let's say that you're near an emergency situation. Now, in a facilitator emergency, it is not it is not a life or death kind of situation. I put an AED up there just for the purposes of illustrating. You may feel like there's an emergency, but I've been facilitating for over 20 years now, and no one has died as a result of my facilitation. So just putting things in context. If, however, you feel completely hijacked, you're emotionally hijacked, this is where we break the glass, and here are our tools for those situations that feel like emergencies. First is breathe. I will bet you that if you are hijacked, you're not breathing. You're at the end of your breath. So one of the things I learned from facilitator Stanford, who is now my FIT, Barbette Weimer Elder, she told me about this thing called 4-7-8, and maybe you've heard of this. You inhale on the count of 4, you hold for 7, and then you exhale on the count of 8. And apparently, this is what allows people, if you have insomnia and you practice this over time, then that allows you to fall asleep a little bit more easily, and it also gets you off the ledge, at least physically. The second thing is, once you have done the breathing, because you have to breathe, is understand what is causing you not to perform in that moment and let it go. If you know what some of your triggers are, so for me, one of my triggers is a good-looking man who is not engaged and starts talking to starts talking to one of his colleagues who is a senior woman. So I didn't know that was one of the things that hijacked me until it happened to me when I was doing a one-day course someplace. And all of a sudden I got hijacked that, oh my God, they're talking about me behind my back, and I got completely hijacked. And then I thought to myself, okay, what is going on, Calvin? You are getting hijacked right now. It is because you think they're talking about you, and even if they are, I gotta just let it go. I'm not gonna be a good facilitator if I focus on that. So my paranoia, my worry that hierarchy is gonna get the best of me, just, you gotta tell yourself, let it go. Speak it to yourself, and the bubble in the stream leaves you. You're moving past that. The river is taking that issue downstream from you. right? Third thing is, this is again part of preparation, is to ground yourself in the facilitation skills card. Look at that card. Where am I on the card? And just proceed. And finally, if you have to, is to explicitly reboot. Rebooting meaning, I'm very, very sorry. There is, I'm afraid I'm not being fully present to the group right now, and so I'm going to just take this opportunity, time out, let's rewind everything and restart. There is a patient interaction that I had a couple of months ago where I did this because things were just off on the wrong foot, and it worked great. You also realize that if you do this more than once in a session, then you lose all your credibility. So use this last one very, very judiciously. So that's group. Now we have the institution. And even though it looks like I don't, even though you may imagine I have lots and lots and lots of stuff to say about the institution, which I might, and we don't have that much time left, actually, there's not much to say about it. Only because in the context of this group, there may be a lot of stuff about the institution that emerges in your didactics. I'm sure that you've seen this before, where people start talking about, well, if you only fix the windows in my exam room, or if you could only make the logistics in the clinic work, then I would be able to do all these things, right? So there are certain things we can affect in our one-day courses, and there's certain things we can't. So so I'm just going to boil this institutional overarching idea to one word, and that is serenity. And when I say serenity, if you remember the Seinfeld episodes where the Jerry Stiller character is going, serenity now, not that kind of serenity. I'm talking about a different kind of serenity. I'm talking about the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so in the context of a one-day course or one-day class, that oftentimes institutional things come up, and people get quite hijacked about them in your class. You know, and these are important items that institutions must take care of. And remembering what the point of the day is, and that is about communication, and that is about how my communication skills, improving my own communication skills with somebody else. And that is the one thing that I have control over in that particular day. These are the things that I can work on. And so just trying to focus folks away from those external distractions toward what is happening in the moment. I found that to be a useful redirection. So then, to summarize, we've got the me with heart and love, and understanding where we are, bringing the super person confidence as much as we can, and also remembering that there are tensions inherent in being a person who is facilitating, that there are certain one-on-one interactions that we can improve, including making certain that we are meeting people where they are from the very, very beginning of when they walk into a room, and using RCC skills all throughout the day. Group level interventions, understanding who might be in the group, what diversity issues may be arising, some of those facilitation challenges, the subtle to less subtle intervention approach, and the in case of emergency items. And finally, when thinking about the overall institutional approach, the serenity of knowing when we can intervene and when we can't, and being able to tell the difference between the two. I am really excited to hear if there are other questions or comments or cases that you'd like to bring up in the last couple of minutes that we have on this webinar. Maybe I can just say one final thing, and is there's something that does come up, please feel free to email me, calvin.chou, C-H-O-U, @ucsf.edu, and or post something to the ACH Connect Train the Trainer Facilitators board, and then we can have further conversation about that.
Calvin, it does look like we have one question that came through the chat box from Mina.
Ah, great. Thank you. Mina, nice to see you. What do you recommend if someone starts crying in the middle of setting up a scenario? Oh, yeah. So there are things that happen often when you're setting up a scenario, and the things that don't happen that often. This is one of the things that doesn't happen that often, and it also has happened to me. So crying is a stopper. I think I get curious about why the tears, I think, and is it the case that is upsetting to the participant? Is it just the setting that's upsetting to them? Is it that there's a mental health question, or is it that they're just burnt out? And when we start talking about these things, then the thoughts can become overwhelming. So that's my differential of what might be going on with a participant in that moment. And I have a very, very low threshold at that point to not force them if they don't want to move through the scenario. And it is also it can be a very, very helpful moment for the group to show their support for the learner. Once some of the extra details, if you can plumb some extra details, is to have the compassion or empathy that we're hoping to teach these folks emerge, and to create a space for the fact that our jobs as people in healthcare are really, really hard, that we sometimes don't have all of the support that we may need. And if you are facilitating in your own institution, then thinking about eventually taking that person aside in a break or something like that, and pointing them to some wellness resources that you may know of in your institution. If you don't happen to know some of those things, then to collect their email information or contact information and connect them to somebody who you think can give them wellness information, if that happens to be the issue. Katie, can you share a link for where to access the board of the Train the Trainer shared insights? Would you mind doing that? Stephanie?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. I will share that link in an email that we'll be sending out a registration link for the Facilitator Summit and the upcoming interactive discussion on that. So I will include the link for the shared insights in an email to everyone.
Terrific. I'm deeply, deeply appreciative of the time that you spent listening to this webinar and of your of the thoughts and participation and moving into the future. Any other questions or comments or confusions or worries that you have? I would love to hear about them either personally or on the board. And I think we can all learn from all of our experiences so that we can just all of us become even better facilitators and really ultimately to make certain that we are making our mark on our institution's culture.
Thank you, Calvin. It looks like we might actually have one more question in the chat from Katie.
I'm not, where is it going? Down further. When offering feedback that may be more critical, do you have any, oh yeah, this is a great question. Thank you, Katie. So yes, I have a line. If no one else has said it, so you know, you're facilitating and you've done the rounds of the rounds of appreciative feedback, the rounds of reinforcing feedback, and then you go to the learner, anything you would have done differently, you go to the patient, one other thing from the group, and if your piece of feedback that you want to share, you feel is important, has not yet been offered, at your turn, my line is, would you be open to something I noticed? And then I report what I noticed in as low inference terms as possible, not something like, it looks like you were really hijacked when you were talking about blah, blah, blah. I would say, and this is where your powers of observation and taking notes are critical. What I noticed was when you spoke to that patient about prostate cancer, and the patient seemed upset. What I noticed that you did in the moment was that you patted the patient on the head. And the reaction I saw in the patient was that the patient's eyes opened wide, their shoulders and back kind of rose up. They opened their mouth, and also in addition to that, I felt uncomfortable in that moment, right? So that's the feed, like very specific behaviorally based feedback. Even better than that, if there's something that at that level, and this is that, by the way, this scenario that I'm talking about right now, this has never happened in a class, but it has happened to one of the medical students that I was supervising once. So it has happened. What I did in the moment, rather than just talk about all those things, was, would you be open to something I noticed? Do you remember when you talked to the patient about prostate cancer? Do you remember that interaction? What was your intent when you were patting the patient on the head, right? So just asking the question, using those art loops. What was your intent? And the student said to me, oh, you know, I was just feeling so bad for the patient. I didn't know what to do. So all of a sudden I found myself patting the patient on the head, right? The response. Oftentimes when we don't know what to do, we find ourselves doing something we are surprised ourselves that we're doing. And so I totally get that. What I noticed was, this is what the patient's reaction was. And This is my reaction. And what are your thoughts about that? Okay. I use that example because it is one of the most delicate examples of corrective feedback that I've ever given, and it is corrective feedback that had to be given. I can't just let it go. So the more compassionate you can be about asking about intent and then talking about the impact, that's the construct I use.
Great. Thanks, Calvin, for taking the time to answer some of those additional questions and for leading a very engaging discussion with the group. And thank you, everyone, for joining the call. We hope that you will join us for the Facilitator Summit discussion on the 16th at 1:30. As mentioned earlier, we will follow up with a link via email to register, and we'll also include some of the links that we've discussed here in this webinar.